Hi, I'm Bill Price, and this is Greg Cesario. We're here today to talk to you about a new wedge called MG3. But before, Greg, we get into MG3, we want to talk about our success. And right now, we have the fastest growing wedge at retail, which is all about tour validation. It's all about our perfection of our soles and our geometry that we have on our soles today. So a lot of that has all been successful. But today with MG3, it's a whole new look and a whole new design. Tell us a little bit about the new design.
So MG3 is a product of really the evolution of two great lines of wedges with MG1 and MG2. We've had incredible success with each one, and this is really the best of what we've ever had to offer in our whole wedge lineup.
A couple things that you'll see the same in MG1, MG2, and as well as MG3 is the sole. You'll see the CNC on the sole, a continuation there.
Yeah, that's an important technology for us that allows us to be as precise with our sole geometries as anything.
So also, you have the thick, thin pad back here. What does that do and what does that provide for the golfers?
Thick, thin pad allows us to really center the center of gravity in the precise locations throughout the set. These wedges are very progressive with the center of gravity, starting with the lowest in the pitching wedge all the way up to the highest in our highest loft.
So does that provide a little bit of feel?
Provides great feel because now your impact on the face is much more in unison with where the center of gravities are.
So thicker on the 60, the higher lofts, and thinner on the lower lofts. Is that correct?
Correct. The lower the CG and the lower lofts provides, proper ground penetration and also ball flight. And then when you get to the higher lofts, now you produce the lowest trajectory and the highest spin, which is what the best players are looking for.
What's really important, and when we work with tour players a lot, Greg, that you do, a lot has to do with ideal launch conditions. Yeah. So when you're designing a wedge and you're looking at the wedge, it's getting those ideal launch conditions. So what are the changes that we did here to dial in those ideal launch conditions? You talked about progressive.
Yeah, everything's progressive in these, from the hosel lengths, which are much shorter in the pitching wedge, and then they progressively get longer into, that allows CG movement to be a little bit higher as you get to the higher lofts in the bag.
And it also moves it towards the center of the face as well.
And moves it more towards the center.
Also, I noticed that the toe heights and the blade lengths are very different on this set, on MG3 versus MG2.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on profile. We really wanted to improve the ability for these things to square up better to the player's eye at address. We also wanted the offsets and the leading edges all to look super clean, just for improved aesthetics.
Okay, and one addition here, you see a 46-degree wedge. This is the first time we've had a 46-degree wedge in the lineup. Why the 46?
46 is such an important loft now because it really represents where pitching wedge lofts are within our P-Series sets of irons. Now a player can choose this as his pitching wedge to that set, and what's the benefit there? Well, a little bit more feel, a little bit more spin, and a little bit more bounce actually on the sole, which allows them to hit more partial shots and better around the green for chip and run shots.
Okay. We also have a continuation of MG2, which is raw face technology. So we have raw face technology also in this. What is the big benefit or the consumer benefit of raw face technology?
Raw face technology is all about spin and control of your golf ball. Spin equals control. So if your spin rates are decreased, let's say in wet conditions, you're going to have a very difficult time controlling that wedge shot and stopping it on the green. Raw face technology allows us to make the most precise edges on our grooves without the coating and the plating of a chrome plating. So it allows it to be a little bit truer to specification. The other nice thing we have on MG3 is the new micro rib area on the face.
Yeah, so that's actually on the land area in between the grooves.
Correct.
So that it's actually raised. So it's an actual raised feature. So how does this benefit those shorter shots, especially those 30, those 20-yard shots, those 10-yard shots? How does that raised rib provide more spin?
It really raises the spin rate because it creates more friction. That ball doesn't slide up the face, especially in wet conditions. But we also saw an increase of spin rates on dry conditions with that new raised rib feature.
So if you do not have, if you have a plated wedge today, the drop off on spin is about 50%.
Right.
from dry conditions to wet conditions. And with raw face, it's only maybe a drop off of 20 to 25%, which is manageable. I think for good tour players, all tour players want a manageable condition that they can control. So that's the benefit of raw. But now that shorter shot with the raised rib, that's just adding more to the whole raw story. So raw plus micro rib is really a great story for us on added spin. Now, last, we want to get into a little bit of, we did a big change with the sole geometry. So let's start with the low bounce. What do we do differently on the sole of the low bounce?
Well, low bounce wedges are super important for the better players usually because their swings are a little bit more shallow and they like versatility. So with the new low bounce, I really increased a little bit of that leading edge bounce so it doesn't dig.
I noticed a little bit of that ski area on there. You can see that line that's in front of that sea grind shape that you have today.
Yeah, it's just a subtle leading edge bounce. It actually measures at about 17 degrees, but it's very subtle and it blends in with the camber, which is the roundness of that whole low bounce. The other thing that the low bounce design has is a lot of relief off the heel, the trailing edge, and the toe area, which really comes into play when a player opens the face.
That's an important part of
Yes.
that, because I think keeping that leading edge lower to the ground, that's what all players talk about, right?
Yeah, especially when you open that face.
Okay, let's get to the standard bounce, because this is a majority of what people buy today. I noticed there's some changes that we did here. We got a spine section that's been moved forward
Correct.
towards the leading edge. So why the change there?
Yeah, standard bounce, you know, I think our goal from a design standpoint was to create something that fit the masses, fit the majority of players that are not dramatically steep or dramatically shallow, but most players do not play enough bounce. And you need a little bit of resistance. And I think that the wedges on the market nowadays have too little bounce. So I wanted to put a little bit more bounce, but I also wanted to put some relief on the trailing edge. So now this plays effectively, you know, truer to the bounce that we stamp on the wedge, but it is much more versatile than our previous standard bounces because of that relief around the edge a
Great.
little more.
Now, the last bounce that we have is a high bounce.
Yeah.
So this went through a lot of changes. Take us through. I think it looks a little bit wider, a little bit more camber. What else did you do to the sole?
My goal on the high bounce was to create the most playable high bounce wedge on the market. And you know, there is a lot of good players that require high bounce. Just because you're a tour player or a great playing amateur, you know, your swing dynamics dictate what bounce you have. And there's a lot of guys that like to hit a lot of shots and knock down shots. And usually when you hit those shots, you get a little steeper on it and a little more bounce is required. But players also want to be able to open a wedge. So I put a lot of relief on the trailing edge and the heel area of that high bounce, and now you have a versatile high bounce wedge.
So 3 different bounces: low, we've got standard, and we got high bounce.
Correct.
We're going to offer 2 different finishes. Okay, Greg, let's summarize all the changes of MG3. Some of the things that you've seen today is a continuation of raw face technology, but we added something else to the face, and that was the micro rib.
Correct. Yeah, that allows us to get more spin and more friction on wet shots and partial shots.
Great. Now, also MG3 went through a lot of changes on the shaping of it. So let's talk a little bit about the key features of MG3.
MG3 is all about progressive changes. From the center of gravity that is very low in the pitching wedge in the new 46 all the way up to the highest lofts where that CG gets high to produce lower launch and higher spin shots.
So progressive, you used the word progressive a lot.
Yes.
So we talked about just the hosel length, the blade length, toe height, so everything transitions well out of a set of, say, P790s, P770s.
Yeah, that's the thing where a player can really see a continuation and a flow of the look of his wedges all the way through every loft.
So all these changes provides ideal launch conditions, and that's what tour players are always looking for, the ideal launch conditions. So again, progressive, ideal launch conditions, and then again, sole geometry. We did some sole geometry work on all 3 of them: low bounce, standard bounce, high bounce. Briefly, it looks like we did a little bit of increase of width.
Yeah, we
And
increased width on the high bounce. We put a little more camber in all of our soles that allows smoother entry and exit into the turf. We paid a lot of attention to what the better players were asking for with hitting different shots.
Well, Greg, thank you very much for everything you've done here. And there you have it, the new MG3 by TaylorMade.